Welcome to Public Speaking with Peter George. Do you want to be calm, confident, and credible every time you speak in public? Then stay tuned as Peter and his guests discuss public speaking tips, techniques, and tactics that help you increase your impact, influence, and income. Here's your host, the author of The Captivating Public Speaker, Peter George.
Do you deliver business presentations? If so, do you include stories? And if you don't include them, why not? Is it because you don't think stories are appropriate for business? Is it because you can't find relevant stories? Is it because you don't believe you can tell stories effectively? Well, if you don't tell stories for these or other reasons, my guest, Sophie Wadsworth, offers several ideas that might change your perspective. Drawing on her experience as an executive leader and storyteller, Sophie helps leaders craft personal, mission-centered communications, build a story bank for use in key meetings or keynotes, and improve presentation skills to engage their audiences. Her clients include executives, authors, scientists, and leaders at companies such as Fidelity, Amazon Web Services, Greater Lowell Community Foundation, and Condé Nast. Here's my conversation with Sophie Wadsworth. Hi, Sophie. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Peter. Thank you. Great to be with you.
Sophie, today we're going to discuss how our listeners can improve their communications through storytelling and the like. So let's start right at the beginning. What is a story and how is it constructed?
A story can be defined a number of ways. The simplest would be it's a sequence of events that involve some kind of a problem, some kind of a conflict for a character or a set of characters. And there's a transformation or a change that happens in the course of the story. I would add to that if it's a business story, it also has a point to make or a takeaway for your listeners. It's more than entertainment.
A couple of key words there. One was it has conflict. And that separates it from an anecdote, right? That it has a conflict and therefore a takeaway or a moral, where an anecdote may or may not.
That is an interesting question. You know, I just came across what I might call an anecdote because it's extremely short, and yet there is a moment of conflict. It was a story from the history of Hewlett-Packard about their founder coming in on a weekend to access some equipment in a room that he found locked. And so the story goes, he got wire cutters, clipped open the lock, put a sign on the door that said, "From now on, this door will remain unlocked. We trust our people." And that has become part of their origin story and their, of course, culture. And I would call that an anecdote in its brevity, that we don't have time to see a conflict really build. It's really one scene we have with, sort of a resulting action.
All right. And the other thing you're talking about, if it's business, having that takeaway for the people listening. And one of the things I hear quite often from leaders is they say things like, well, this is business. It's not the place for stories. So A, do you agree with this? And B, how can leaders use stories to connect with both their teams and their stakeholders?
So not knowing exactly what's running through their mind and having talked to a number of leaders about their perspective and opinions on story, I think for what's running through their mind, I would agree that leaders often think a story is like what you're sharing when you're hanging out with friends, or what you might find in entertainment, or even something more like the movies. And it's true that in business, people want you to get to the point and be concise and really give valuable information. And yet we can think about story in a different way than we might in an everyday sense, and imagine it as a container for truth. For instance, data tells a story. And we can find a story that will carry the truth of the data in a way that's really sticky and memorable. And that's an example of where leaders in business can use story to great advantage rather than just sharing the information or the chronology of things that are happening, past, present, and future.
I love two words you use, sticky and memorable. Stories are sticky, or stories should be constructed so they are sticky, yes?
Yes, I believe so, because you want to engage the folks you're talking with, and you want to stay with them beyond the telling of the story so that they can take action on it in some way, or perhaps you even want them to pass that story on to other people like your customers.
I also hear a lot of people, whether it's leaders or not, say, well, I don't think I have any interesting stories to tell, any stories that would fit. What suggestions do you have when we really have that feeling that my story's uninteresting, if I have any at all?
It's such an important opportunity for leaders to reflect on what stories they have. And there's two parts to it, I believe. The first part is reflecting on what is it that you most want to convey? What is it you want to leave in your listeners' minds, whether it's your colleagues in a meeting or an audience in a presentation? And knowing what you want to leave with them, you can then look at what are the stories you have. Maybe they're kind of the origin stories of your company or even your career that you tend to come back to, or colleagues tend to come back to when they talk about your organization and your mission. Maybe it is the most vivid of the experiences you've had through a crisis in the organization, a challenging time. Maybe it's a high point where you reached a certain milestone. And those can come from reflection and thinking about, well, what are the stories that come through my mind, or that maybe I've even told around the conference table or the dinner table, my kind of war stories, but also by listening to colleagues as they talk. And thirdly, asking questions, saying, when you look back on, let's say, the time of the pandemic, or when you look back on the past 5-10 years of our work in our company, what stands out to you as the most pivotal moments in our work? Or frame the question so that it will get to the story that is going to help you tell the information that you feel you really need to share. So those are a couple ways involving reflection on what you want to say, diving into the stories that you tend to tell or haven't told but have running through you, and then listening in to your colleagues and even asking them questions if they're not folks who share stories naturally. You can just ask the right question.
Is giving yourself enough time to come up with stories key? What I mean by that is a lot of us tend to procrastinate when it comes to speaking. We know we have to speak on October 1st, so we wait till September 28th to start to develop our presentation. If we give ourselves more time to think about it and begin it earlier, when we hear the news or watch a movie, do stories start to stand out to us and we say, oh, that's a great story. I could use this for my presentation on October 1st.
Yes, certainly time is your friend in all kinds of ways as you get ready to give a talk. I'm remembering a time when, as an executive leader in the nonprofit world, which is my background before becoming a consultant, I came onto the stage not as prepared as I might have been. And while the audience was engaged, I realized very clearly that I had missed an opportunity to give that nuanced, more comfortable kind of delivery. And time will give you a chance to practice. And yes, it will give you a chance to take in what's going on in current events, or just field a little more information. If you need to get a little bit of detail from somebody, have a quick chat with a colleague, a client, so that you can make something more vivid, which is so important for storytelling. Time will help you do that. And that could be as simple as putting a date on your calendar with somebody. Can we check in for 10 minutes? I need to ask you a few questions on this so that I can give the best presentation that I can. And then there it is on the calendar. It's like a workaround for procrastination.
And we all do it to some degree or another.
Yes.
What do you think leaders should know about actually delivering stories?
Well, that's a really important question as well, because we can have wonderfully clear and compelling stories and presentations ready to go. And we are human beings in these bodies who are experiencing each other visually with our eyes and with our ears and the sound and so on. I'd love to ask you first, Peter, before I answer that, what kinds of issues do you hear coming up for folks that you work with in terms of delivery? There's a couple that I hear, but I'd love to hear from you first.
Have you heard what noted speakers and readers are saying about Peter's book, The Captivating Public Speaker? A love letter to creating significant impact and authentic influence. If you're looking to increase your impact through spoken word, this book is a must-read. Extremely well-written, engaging, fun, and serious at the same time. After this episode, please use the link in the show notes to check out The Captivating Public Speaker on Amazon. Now, back to Peter and his guest.
Some of the things I hear quite often are, I'm not a good storyteller. I don't know how to go about it. I can come up with a good story on paper, or I see a story in a magazine or on television or whatever it might be, and I think it's appropriate. But when it comes to me actually revising it for my use and delivering it, it doesn't come off as I had intended. The moral doesn't come out. I skip over things. I downplay the conflict. Even when they understand what they need to do or should do, they don't feel they can do it well.
Yeah, I hear those things too. And I also hear challenges in terms of mindset, that they've done the really critical preparation steps, which I'll speak about in a moment. And then when they get into it, something shifts in their mind, right? There's a second conversation going on. They drift from their material. A lot of what helps with delivery is practice, because we are creatures where when we get it in our body, just like playing a sport or any number of other things, making dinner, you do it enough times and you are in a kind of flow where you don't have to actually think about every step. Something tactical that I often encourage clients to play with, and this is where you do need a little time to try things out, is how are you guiding yourself? I mean, there's certainly people who are speaking completely off the cuff with no notes of any kind. But for the rest of the folks who don't have it all in their head, and that wonderful ability to be spontaneous while also knowing it all by heart, I would say, are you ready in your PowerPoint to read from your notes as you go? Or do you have some key notes up at the top of your monitor that you can follow if you're in a different format? Maybe you're really on camera and you're not able to be reading while you're speaking. And certainly if you're in a room live with people, you need to figure out, are you going to have an index card with a few key points? It's better to have that than be stumbling along. And there's certainly ways you can make it look a little more interesting, have the program cover the conference, the conference brochure on the outside, and your notes are here. And let that be your guide so that you have some of the key points, and practice with it at least once. More is better if you can, or even practicing with a colleague. But even if you just can practice once, it will help you internalize it. And then if you really can handle a little extra tech, recording it, whether it's on your phone or create your own Zoom meeting with yourself. This is like the wacky world we live in, that you can do such things. And then play it back fast and hear yourself. Where do you think you should add a pause to give more emphasis and let your audience process what you're saying? For instance, a recording can really help you hear where you sound off or need to change your pacing. There's many more examples, but those are a few, I think, key ones for delivery prep.
I tell my clients that the phone was the best invention ever for public speakers.
Yeah, it's true. And we see things that we just can't hear as we're doing the delivery. It's a paradox that we can't sort of fully witness ourselves and be the one delivering.
Even though at some time it might have been the only thing we had. That was the problem with watch yourself in a mirror. It's tough to deliver as you would and critique yourself at the same time.
It is. And back to your question about delivery and, what I would share with leaders about storytelling, we really want to make space for ourselves to let the movie of the story play in our own minds, that we drop into. It is almost like a little bit of a dream state. I know this sounds a little woo-woo, but to the extent we can let the images, the character, let's say the hero or the cast of characters of the people you're talking about be alive in your mind's eye, you will be more able to make them vivid for the listener. You're not just sort of delivering these words, you are inviting them into a shared experience, a shared felt experience.
Back when my kids were young, and I would read to them the storybooks that you could show them pictures while you're reading, whether they were falling asleep, were good because they got to see the pictures. But if you didn't show them the pictures or had a book that didn't have pictures in it, it allowed them to create those characters and what they looked like. It was their big bad wolf and exactly how they pictured that. And I'm sure how my daughter pictured it and how my son pictured it were two entirely different wolves. But that allows us to do that. You can describe them and create them, and we as listeners can develop what we believe they look like and how they act or whatever else it may be.
Yes. And the choices we get to make as we're telling the stories is if the teeth are really important, well, as a storyteller, we get to decide the image we're sharing of those teeth. We get to hit those key points, and the rest, yes, the reader's filling all the rest in, which is magic. And it's part of what we long for, to be transported in that way and to be connected in that way. Because as I'm even picturing you sharing stories with kids in your life, that paints a picture of you. And I'm with you. I'm remembering doing that and myself falling asleep sometimes. I was so tired, but also that sense of, the kid's eyes being really big. So here you're telling me the story, Peter, and we're getting literally on the same wavelength. Our brains,
right.
Lots of good research on this, are syncing up, and we're both in that narrative together.
Let's talk about one specific genre of stories. And like anything else, stories fit into different categories. Dramatic is one, but humorous is another. And there's another thing I hear leaders say that, yeah, I agree, stories are important and they have their place, but they might be reluctant to add humor to the stories. And I often think if we can get people to laugh a little bit, depending, of course, on what the presentation's about, they often hang on to it a little longer. What do you think about adding humor to stories in a business setting?
Oh, I think it's critical to know your audience and what flies for humor. I think it also is critical to know oneself. What are you comfortable with? Are you the kind of person who naturally, even on the fly, can add a little extra humor in? Or are you more the kind of person that would benefit from adding, say, a fitting business cartoon into your presentation, or retelling some kind of a business or industry joke? And there's jokes in every industry, right? That isn't going to require you have, really finesse delivery. You are sharing something that is funny, and you could test it out on a colleague if you want. For those who are a little more spontaneous, I think you can consider devices like exaggerating, like playing up an extreme a little bit, in a crisis. We don't have to be like reporters where you're perfectly loyal to every fact. You can exaggerate a little, and that can be funny if something's a little bit more extreme, whether it's even an expression on someone's face of surprise or horror, just playing it up a little bit. It can be something small. It doesn't have to be that you're exaggerating the whole critical moment of the story. I would also say that there are, for better or worse, opportunities for humor that come from just little mishaps, like someone's cell phone rings in the audience or in the Zoom meeting is a classic example, or some other noise. And you can find a line to use and be ready to use when that happens. So you can think about who a great thought leader is in your industry. And you can say, well, if it's so-and-so, you go ahead and take that call. Just put yourself on mute. And it lightens it. It isn't just a phone ringing, right? Or a notification. So there's different ways you can script for those mishaps, or, classic is something goes wrong with the Zoom, right? Or the microphone on the stage. And again, you can find a line for that.
Plain spontaneity. So going back, what advice do you wish you'd been given early in your career as a leader and a speaker?
Oh, wow. One is certainly that my personal and professional journey really matters. I wish someone had asked me, well, what's the story of how you came to this work and how you came to this organization and this mission? And encouraged me to share that along with the mission, that the personal and professional has a special power when combined. Each of us is in the work that we do, you and I and all of these leaders that we coach, for a reason that has roots in the personal. And we don't have to be super confessional, but we can go back to something in our roots, whether it was a decade ago or back in our childhood, and connect the dots for our audiences of this is why, or part of why I am called to do this work. This is why I believe in what I'm doing. I wish someone had told me that. I figured it out along the way and became, I think, much more grounded and effective as a spokesperson for the organizations where I worked, because audiences saw how I was a real three-dimensional person and engaged with this mission, and could then see themselves in a similar way, that they are drawn to be part of this organization, part of this company for their reasons, because they've heard me share how I have the personal connection. It invites them to think that way.
Well, Sophie, this has been excellent. And I love how you've shared the importance of a story and how people can use it and deliver it. Where can our listeners learn more about how you help people like them become better storytellers or find those stories that they can put into their presentations?
I invite folks to find me on LinkedIn. Again, my name is Sophie Wadsworth, and my company is Sophie Wadsworth Consulting. You can find me on the web at sophiewadsworth.com.
Okay, I'll have that in the notes. Sophie, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you, Peter. It's fun talking with you.
That's a wrap of another episode of Public Speaking with Peter George. Be sure to tune in again for a conversation with another public speaking expert. And remember to use the link in the show notes to go to Amazon and check out Peter's acclaimed book, The Captivating Public Speaker.